Kahani Bar brings you a cocktail of stories in English and in Hindustani. I am Richa.
This week, we unfold the mystery hidden in the remaining pages of the story. And he jumped off the cliff. From Fauji Heart, written by Neerja K. If some of you missed the first part of the story, be sure to tune in before diving into the second part. So, here we go.
He would often sit on the edge of the cliff that hung out just enough for him to sit on. He would stew in his loneliness with his legs dangling over the sheer drop extending hundreds of feet below him. Initially, his company commander had not paid much attention to his chosen perch, but when he saw him sitting on this precarious spot day after day, long after sundown, he started getting worried. Greenhorns. He always thought them to be very unpredictable. He knew what this rugged, threatening, hostile and intimidating mountain terrains could do to a young man's mind. After all, he himself had been there just a few years ago. Even the CEO had commented on his last visit. Keep an eye on that fawn. Next rotation, you should send him on his annual leave. But the CEO was helpless. He was already short of officers. It was difficult to manage everyone's leave. He had nightmares of Vikram jumping off the cliff. He was himself eager to send Vikram away on leave, which was overdue. But the situation was truly beyond his control. Now that Bhim Bahadur had lit the Bukhari, Vikram steeled himself and finally emerged from his sleeping bag. This one was a little different. It was especially designed for the armed forces for use in snow tents at high altitudes. He had barely finished getting dressed when he had heard someone crying out for joy. "He is here! He is here! Qasid Khan is here! I just caught a glimpse of him round the bend." The cry came from the first lookout, positioned several hundred meters downhill. His message was relayed through various soldiers manning their posts along the tracks, and sudden excitement electrified the camp. One of the boys called out, "Qasid Khan is here! Make the arrangements to welcome him. He must be exhausted after the long trek. Get all the goodies organized for him. Our hero is here." The weary soldiers were galvanized into action, and after quickly gathering the treats, the welcome party huddled together and awaited Qasid Khan's arrival. Even the company commander came out of his snow tent to preside over the gathering. This rush of activity and the imminent arrival of Qasid Khan infused a new life in Vikram too. He hurried into his coat parka, pulled up the hood and put on his Ray-Bans. Vikram wouldn't be caught dead without his precious Ray-Bans on. If he had had his way, he would even wear them to bed. "You never know, the sun might be bright in my dreams," he often joked with his sister. He missed her too. However, he stepped out of his tent in style. So what if he was in the middle of nowhere, with no one around to appreciate his sense of style? It was the only vestige of his earlier life that he could still cling to. There, in the center of the little plateau, was placed a tea chest, and on it were kept some fruits, fresh vegetables. A rare commodity at that height, jaggery and gram. Next to this was a jug full of jam pani. This was a special drink made by mixing a large spoonful of jam in a large glass of warm water. It was an innovative substitute for a soft drink. Vikram took post on his favorite cliff, with his back to the rest, waiting for Qasid Khan to arrive. The company commander glanced over at the huddled soldiers and Vikram over by the cliff and retreated to his tent. He had changed his mind. He had decided that it would not look dignified for a company commander to wait with the rest of his troops for the arrival of the VIP. He pretended to be busy with his files, but underneath his coat parka, his heart was racing. He had to hide his restlessness somehow. He was the leader here. He could not let on that he too was an emotional wreck behind the brave, ruthless exterior that he had always projected. It took great acting skills to play a role like this, day in and day out. He surely deserved an Oscar for his stupendous performance. It would be 15 to 20 minutes before Qasid Khan arrived. Vikram sat patiently in silence. He enjoyed sitting here and took special pleasure in scaring his company commander, especially when the CEO's visit was due. He peered down the cliff. One wrong move and he could plunge to his death. He wondered how it would feel, the free fall without the backup of a parachute. Would he smash to the rocky base first, or would his heart stop beating before that? What would be better? He preferred to breathe his last in midair. That would be neater. It could be as simple as that to end a life, a tiny little leap. But then, it was not a solution to this situation. How could he be thinking along these lines? Was he not being selfish? What would become of his mom, dad, and sister? What about his girlfriend? He shuddered. No, never again would he allow such thoughts to cross his mind. But the truth was that this was not the first time that he had imagined himself gliding off the cliff. Was he a quitter? He wondered. No, I'm not a quitter, he said aloud as if reassuring himself. He got up quickly and started walking away from his perch. He felt wobbly in his knees and completely consumed with guilt over his selfish, foolish thoughts. Vikram's despondent self-flagellation was interrupted by loud cheers and whoops of joy. He turned just in time to see the vision of Qasid Khan in all his glory as he walked in, proud and elegant in the lead, followed by his team. He was the most handsome Khatchar you could ever find in the land of Yorks, but his eyes were always clouded by a certain sadness. Yes, Qasid Khan was a Khatchar, a mule, a cross between a horse and a donkey. You must wonder then why all this fuss over a mule? Well, you see, he was carrying the most precious load for these soldiers, a load that was eagerly awaited by officers and Jawans alike. He brought them their mail. He was their postman. He was the one who brought them letters from their loved ones. He was their savior. That is why he had been christened Qasid, meaning messenger. Ages ago, a soldier called Salim had given him this name, and long after he had left the post, the name had stayed. Qasid was not the only Khatchar that visited them. There was no other way to get stuff up here except through these mules. From rations to medicines to cans of kerosene oil to tins of jam, milkmaid and cheese to the uniforms, everything had been brought up here on the back of a mule. It was a tough life for the men as well as the mules, but more so for the mules. They would load up at base camp, trudge uphill for a week, deliver their load, and then slowly work their way downhill, only to be loaded up and sent off again. But Qasid was special. He brought them their letters. He was almost holy. Therefore, the 5-star treatment. He was immediately relieved of his load and led towards all the tidbits laid out for him. This ritual had also been started by Salim and had turned into a proper tradition now. Kasid was like a family member. The dak was quickly sorted and distributed. Some were lucky and some were not. Those who were not started to count the days till the next dark day, at least a week or two away. Alas, there was no letter for Vikram. His spirits plummeted as low as the deep valley beyond the cliff. He walked back to his perch, morosely at a slow pace. Step by step, he scaled the path to his beloved cliff. His depression had reached a new low. The thoughts of another 2 weeks without a letter was simply unbearable. Gloom shrouded his very being. The company commander was lucky to have received a letter from his wife and his little daughter. He felt almost guilty seeing a dejected Vikram slowly walking back to his favorite spot. He too walked back to the privacy of his den. As he sat in his tent, poring over every word, he was startled by a commotion outside, followed by a heart-wrenching scream. His Sahayak burst into the tent. "Sahab, he has jumped off the cliff!" The company commander stood rooted to the ground. The CEO's worst nightmare had come true. What was he going to tell him? What were they going to tell Vikram's parents? What in God's name was he going to do? A suicide in his company? He was ruined. What a mess this young man had got him and the battalion into. He shook himself and the soldier in him took over. The half-read letter fell from his hand and sailed in the air as it landed on the ground. He rushed out of his tent and ran towards the cliff. A group of soldiers had gathered around the spot. Seeing him, they stood aside and made way for him. As the crowd parted, he saw Vikram standing at the edge and sobbing like a child. What in the world was going on? The company commander roared at them all. "Who the hell has jumped off the cliff?" "Kasid Khan, sir," sobbed Vikram. "He jumped to his death. Sir, he did not touch a thing today. He just ignored all the food that was laid out for him and walked towards the cliff. He looked up at me with his sad eyes and then suddenly jumped to his death. It was as if he was saying to me, 'I can't take this anymore.'" And Vikram continued to weep inconsolably. There was grief on every face, and every pair of eyes was wet, including the company commanders.
This is Richa signing off. Take good care of yourselves till I'm back with the next story.